Picture this. You're standing on a frozen plain in a place that doesn't exist anymore, a lost world called Doggerland, buried now under the North Sea. It's 20,000 years ago. The cold isn't just uncomfortable, it's the kind that cuts through your lungs like glass. And the dark isn't the dark, you know. There's no streetlight, no phone screen, no glow on the horizon. It's absolute. It presses on your skin like a weight, and you are completely alone. Here's the part that should stop you cold. In this world, being alone doesn't just mean being lonely. It means you are already, functionally, dead. You are what one researcher bluntly called a biological disaster waiting to happen. So today we're asking a question that sounds simple but isn't. Why did humans start living in groups? And the answer isn't some clever invention by a genius ancestor who thought, hey, teamwork sounds nice. The real answer is much darker, much more desperate, and honestly, much more interesting. We like to imagine our ancestors as tough, resilient, built for survival. And in some ways, sure. But here's the twist. Biologically speaking, humans are kind of a disaster from day one. Look at a baby giraffe. Within an hour of being born, it's standing. Within a day, it's running from lions. Now look at a human baby. It can't lift its own head. It can't crawl. It can't do anything except cry and hope someone shows up. This isn't an accident. It's a trade-off written into our DNA, and it comes down to something scientists call the obstetric dilemma. Our brains got big, ridiculously big. But a fully grown human skull literally cannot fit through the birth canal if the brain finishes developing in the womb. So evolution made a brutal compromise. Humans are born premature, on purpose, every single time. A newborn's brain is only about a quarter of its adult size. The rest of the construction has to happen out here, in the open, in a world crawling with things that would love a 3-kilogram snack. Let that sink in for a second. Every single human who has ever lived arrived into the world essentially unfinished. That is the starting condition of our entire species. Now, put yourself in the position of an ancient mother. You need to walk for miles over rough terrain to find food. You need to keep your own body warm. And you're carrying a creature that can die from a few degrees of temperature change or a single afternoon of neglect. There is no version of this where one woman does it alone. It's mathematically, physically impossible. So our ancestors didn't just pair up, they built something bigger. Anthropologists call it cooperative breeding. Childcare wasn't a private individual responsibility. It was communal. It belonged to the group. For 99% of human history, we lived as hunter-gatherers. And in that world, a child wasn't raised by one or two people, a child was raised by a web. Grandmothers, aunts, cousins, and even unrelated adults would hold, feed, and carry that baby. Babies were passed hand to hand like something precious being kept warm. And this is where one of the strangest and most beautiful ideas in evolutionary biology comes in: the grandmother hypothesis. Human women are one of the only species on Earth that live for decades after they stop being able to have children. Why would evolution allow that? The theory is chilling in its logic. A grandmother who has stopped reproducing but is still alive to help raise her grandchildren is worth more to the survival of the group than a grandmother who keeps having babies of her own. Evolution essentially decided that experience was more valuable than fertility. So we've established it. Humans needed the group to survive. But here's where the trade-off gets real, because safety wasn't free. It came at a cost that we, in our modern lives of locked doors and private bedrooms, can barely imagine. The cost was privacy. All of it. Gone. In an ancestral camp, nobody slept alone. Ever. You slept pressed against other bodies, sharing warmth, sharing breath, on hard ground, in a pile of people who were listening even while they dreamed. This wasn't cuddling for comfort, it was, quite literally, survival engineering. Human sleep evolved a sentinel function, meaning even in unconsciousness, part of your brain stayed alert, scanning for the snap of a branch, the wrong smell on the wind, the silence that meant something was watching. You weren't sleeping in a group because it was cozy. You were sleeping in a group because a lone silhouette in the dark is prey, and a cluster of silhouettes around a fire is something else entirely, something predators have learned, over tens of thousands of years, to be afraid of. And that fear is real, and it's ancient. Humans have been such effective, relentless hunters for so long that we actually reshaped the instincts of the animals around us. Lions, wolves, big cats, they carry an inherited caution about humans baked into their behavior. Approaching a human camp is a gamble they've learned generation after generation isn't worth taking. But that caution only holds if you're not alone. A single human wandering in the dark is just slow meat. A group of humans, especially a group with fire, is something that fights back, remembers, and hunts you in return. So the tribe kept you alive. But living pressed, shoulder to shoulder with the same people every day for your entire life does something to the human psyche. Imagine never being unseen. Your meals prepared by someone else's hands in some ancient cultures, food for infants was literally pre-chewed by an adult before being given to the child. Your reputation, your standing, your safety, all depending on staying in everyone's good graces, all day, every day. That is an intense, suffocating kind of intimacy. And humans, being humans, needed a release valve. Enter alcohol. Long before farming, long before bread, long before Homo sapiens even existed as a species, our ancestors were already chemically prepared for fermented fruit. Around 10 million years ago, a genetic mutation gave our lineage an enzyme called ADH4, which let us safely digest the alcohol found in fruit that had started to rot on the forest floor. We were, quite literally, built to drink before we were even human. Fast forward to about 13,000 years ago, and you find groups like the Natufians brewing beer inside burial caves not for a party, but as a sacred ritual, a way to bind a grieving community together and mark the passage between life and death. And that grief was constant. In many ancient populations, somewhere between a third and half of all children didn't live to see their fifth birthday. Alcohol wasn't a party favor. It was a doorway, a way to soften a world that handed out devastating loss on a routine basis. Here's a strange side effect of all that group living, cooperative, caretaking behavior. It changed how other species see us. Dolphins, cats, crows, elephants. There are documented cases across the animal kingdom of creatures approaching humans specifically for help, not humanity in the abstract, specific humans. Animals seem to run something like a background check, watching for patterns of gentleness and predictability before they decide a person is safe. And humans are one of the only species on this planet that, more often than not, responds to a vulnerable creature from another species with help instead of harm. That's not nothing. That's the long shadow of everything we just talked about. Millions of years spent building a species around cooperation, caretaking, and trust. So let's lay the whole trade out on the table. We gave up the ability to be alone. We gave up quiet. We gave up privacy in its most basic form, sleeping unwatched, eating unwatched, existing unwatched. In exchange, we got a version of intelligence that could read the stars well enough to navigate oceans, track the seasons by watching the Pleiades rise and fall, and outthink, outorganize, and outsurvive every other hominin species that ever walked the earth. We built the version of the human brain that looks up at the Milky Way and doesn't see a faint smudge of light. It sees a blazing river of stars, dense with information. Because for our ancestors, the night sky wasn't decoration, it was infrastructure. That intelligence didn't develop in comfort. It was sharpened by a world that kept moving the ground under our feet. Rising seas, vanishing megafauna, ice ages that came and went. We are, quite literally, the descendants of the individuals who chose the crowd over the silence, the drama over the void, because the ones who chose isolation didn't get to have descendants at all. So the next time you're annoyed by a group chat, or overwhelmed by a family gathering, or craving 5 minutes of total, uninterrupted quiet. Remember what that quiet actually meant for almost the entirety of human history. It meant danger. It meant exposure. It meant you were, in the oldest and most literal sense, meat. We didn't choose the tribe because it was pleasant. We chose it because the alternative was extinction. And every single one of us, right now, watching this video, is proof that our ancestors made the right call. If you want more of the strange, hidden biology still steering how you sleep, how you eat, and who you trust without even realizing it, hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and stick around. There's a lot more buried in our past than we ever give it credit for. See you in the next one.